Tyler Robinson, 22 years old, from Washington, Utah. He isn't a household name, at least not until September 10th, when police say he carried a rifle onto the roof of a university building, lay down in a firing position, and pulled the trigger on one of the most shocking attacks of the year. The single shot he fired struck and killed conservative figure Charlie Kirk during a Turning Point USA event at Utah Valley University. Within hours, Robinson went from being a quiet electrical apprentice to the center of a national storm. Investigators quickly pieced together his movements. Surveillance cameras, a rifle wrapped in a towel, and even engraved bullet casings that hinted at ideology, memes, or perhaps something darker. His arrest just 33 hours later ended the manhunt, but it didn't end the questions. So what happens now? Robinson is sitting in a Utah County jail cell, denied bail, waiting for prosecutors to file formal charges. If convicted of aggravated murder, the penalties are brutal: life in prison, life without parole, or even death if the state pursues it. The headline screaming "life sentence" may not be official yet, but the possibility is very real. This is the story of how a rooftop rifle shot turned into a national flashpoint, what happened in those minutes at Utah Valley, what investigators discovered in their affidavit, and why Tyler Robinson's fate could become one of the harshest sentences Utah law allows. September 10th began like any other day on the Utah Valley University campus. Students streamed into classes, some gathering in the courtyard outside the Loaf Center, where conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was scheduled to speak. Turning Point USA events always draw attention, supporters packing in, protesters standing nearby, but few expected what would happen just after noon. At around 12:23 p.m., a sound split the courtyard, the crack of a high-powered rifle. Witnesses described it as sharp, startling, out of place against the usual background of chatter and footsteps. Confusion came first. Some thought it was construction noise or maybe a firework, but seconds later, panic set in. Screams erupted as people realized Kirk had collapsed, struck by the shot. Campus security rushed forward, pushing through the chaos as students scrambled for cover. Attendees ducked behind pillars, some recording shaky videos that would later circulate online. Within minutes, police locked down the campus, swarming the area around the Loaf Center. For hours, Utah Valley University was frozen in fear. What no one in the crowd could see at the time was the shooter's vantage point. From the rooftop of the Loaf Center, the attacker had chosen a precise position, prone, steady, overlooking the courtyard below. One shot, one fatal strike, and then gone. In that moment, the questions exploded. Who pulled the trigger? How could someone vanish from a rooftop in broad daylight? And could investigators catch him before he struck again? In those first few hours, the event was reported as a mystery gunman, a potential active shooter. The public didn't yet know who he was, but investigators were already working quickly, retracing steps, scouring cameras, and beginning to build the case that would lead them to a 22-year-old man named Tyler Robinson. When the first wave of panic at Utah Valley University began to settle, police turned immediately to the cameras. UVU's campus is wired with surveillance, and every angle of the courtyard feeds into a timeline investigators could reconstruct. That timeline would become their most powerful tool. The video showed more than chaos in the courtyard. It showed someone arriving on campus in a gray Dodge Challenger, a man who parked, moved toward the Loaf Center, and eventually disappeared from ground view, only to resurface later in places that didn't make sense. Step by step, they traced his movements until the pattern pointed to something chilling: the rooftop. Witness statements backed it up. A few students reported seeing a figure in an unusual spot above the courtyard, lying flat, as if aiming. It was quick, fleeting, but it matched the footage. Then came the breakthrough. Not far from the building, wrapped in a towel and stashed in weeds along a roadside, officers found the rifle, a Mauser 98 with a scope, chambered in 30-06, a weapon capable of exactly the kind of precision strike that had just unfolded. Forensic work connected the dots further. The engraved bullet casings weren't just unusual, they were practically signatures. Investigators stressed the words themselves don't explain motive, but they proved the act was deliberate. And just over a day later, the final piece snapped into place. A tip from a family member, uneasy after a private conversation, pointed directly at Tyler Robinson. Within 33 hours of the shooting, police tracked him down and placed him under arrest. The dry legal language of a probable cause affidavit doesn't usually read like a thriller, but in Tyler Robinson's case, it lays out a sequence of movements that feels almost cinematic. Investigators wrote that surveillance placed Robinson on the UVU campus well before the shooting. His gray Dodge Challenger parked nearby. He was seen carrying what looked like a long object, wrapped in cloth, toward the Loaf Center. From there, cameras lost him briefly, but when they reappeared, the story sharpened. He had gone inside, taken stairwells and restricted halls, and made his way to the rooftop. At one point, a witness reported seeing him lying prone, the position of someone aiming a rifle. Each detail tightened the net, turning blurry footage and fragments of testimony into a clear picture of intent. The affidavit alleges this was where the single fatal shot was fired. From that rooftop vantage point, Robinson had a clear line of sight into the courtyard where Charlie Kirk was speaking. After pulling the trigger, investigators say, Robinson didn't linger. He moved quickly, descended from the roof, and left the building. But he didn't vanish without trace. On the roof, officers recovered bullet casings engraved with the unusual phrases. The rifle itself was later discovered discarded north of campus, wrapped in a towel. For prosecutors, it was a straightforward chain: the rooftop, the shot, the weapon, and Robinson's path away from the scene. It was enough to hold him without bail and to prepare charges that could put him away for life. But who is Tyler Robinson? Until his name flashed across headlines, Tyler Robinson was almost invisible outside his hometown. He's 22 years old, from Washington, Utah, a quiet city near St. George. Court records show no prior criminal history, no violent past, nothing that foreshadowed a rooftop rifle shot. Robinson's path looked ordinary. After finishing high school, he enrolled briefly at Utah State University, attending just a semester in 2021. Later, he shifted to Dixie Technical College, entering an electrical apprenticeship program. By his third year, classmates described him as someone focused on the trade, a student blending into the routine of wiring labs and certifications. Family and friends told investigators that in recent years, Robinson had become more political. What that meant isn't entirely clear. He reportedly mentioned Charlie Kirk's upcoming appearance before the shooting, but no one flagged it as more than casual talk. When police asked, relatives said they never imagined it would lead to violence. What stands out is how quickly he went from anonymous apprentice to national headline. In less than a day, Robinson was identified as the suspect in an attack that stunned a university campus and shook political circles across the country. For investigators, the question is not just what Robinson did, but who he really is beneath the quiet surface. For now, the only certainty is that his life, once unremarkable, now hangs between the possibility of decades behind bars or a sentence with no end at all. Right now, Tyler Robinson hasn't been sentenced. He hasn't even entered a plea. But the charges Utah prosecutors are preparing make one thing clear. If he's convicted, the punishment will be severe. The most serious allegation is aggravated murder. Under Utah law, that's a capital felony. It's the highest category of crime in the state, reserved for deliberate, targeted killings. Prosecutors have the option to pursue the death penalty if they file a special notice within weeks of the arraignment. If they don't, the default punishments are still crushing: life in prison without parole or an indeterminate sentence of 25 years to life. Alongside aggravated murder, investigators expect additional counts: felony discharge of a firearm causing serious injury and obstruction of justice. These charges won't change the overall picture much. They simply reinforce the case that Robinson didn't act recklessly, but intentionally. And here's the chilling part. No matter which charge sticks, every legal path points to Robinson spending the rest of his life behind bars. The fact that he's being held without bail is another signal of how seriously the state views this case. Judges only deny bail when the evidence is strong and the risk is high. In Utah, that often precedes either a capital prosecution or a sentence that removes freedom for the rest of someone's life. There's precedent, too. Other Utah defendants convicted of aggravated murder, without the state seeking execution, have still received life sentences, with no chance of parole. The pathway to release in cases like this is almost non-existent. So while it's technically true that Robinson hasn't been sentenced yet, the legal roadmap is already laid out. And unless something unexpected happens in court, every route points to a prison cell he may never leave. So what happens next? Tyler Robinson sits in a Utah County jail cell, waiting. The next milestone comes when prosecutors formally file charges, something officials say will happen early next week. That filing will trigger Robinson's first court appearance, where he'll hear the charges read aloud and enter a plea. From there, the timeline forks. If Robinson pleads not guilty, the case moves toward a preliminary hearing, where prosecutors present enough evidence to justify a trial. If it clears that hurdle, a full jury trial could follow, with months of discovery, witness preparation, and legal maneuvering. There's also the possibility of a plea deal. In capital cases, defense attorneys often negotiate to avoid the death penalty, sometimes accepting a life sentence without parole instead. But whether prosecutors even offer that depends on how strongly they want to pursue maximum punishment. For now, the court's denial of bail leaves Robinson with no freedom and no leverage. He's locked down, his name on every headline, while the legal system grinds forward. The public may already be speaking about life in prison, but the actual decision lies in a courtroom that hasn't yet begun the process. This wasn't just another campus tragedy. It became national news within minutes, largely because of who the victim was. Charlie Kirk isn't an anonymous figure. As the founder of Turning Point USA, he's a high-profile conservative voice, constantly in the spotlight, drawing both fervent supporters and harsh critics. His presence on a college campus was already a flashpoint, the kind of event that generates rallies, protests, and online debate. So when he was gunned down in broad daylight, the symbolism amplified the shock. To his followers, it looked like an attack on free speech itself. To his critics, it became another volatile headline in an already polarized political climate. And to the media, it was irresistible. A well-known figure, a young suspect, and a dramatic act of violence on a university rooftop. That combination meant the case was never going to stay local. National outlets descended on Utah, framing the story as part of the broader conversation about political violence in America. The speculation around Robinson's motives only fed the attention, even though investigators have avoided drawing firm conclusions. In the end, it isn't just about one man with a rifle. It's about what his actions represent in a divided country. Right now, Tyler Robinson hasn't been sentenced. But if the charges play out the way prosecutors expect, his future narrows to just a few grim outcomes. Life in prison with no parole, a 25 to life stretch that likely means he never leaves custody. Or, if the state pushes for it, the death penalty. The probable cause affidavit painted a chilling picture. The rooftop setup, the engraved casings, the discarded rifle, and the quick escape. The evidence, prosecutors argue, makes this a case of intent, not accident. For Robinson, a quiet 22-year-old apprentice from Washington, Utah, the jump from everyday life to capital murder charges is almost unthinkable. Yet that's where he stands today, behind bars, without bail, awaiting a courtroom that could decide he never walks free again. So no, Tyler Robinson hasn't officially been sentenced to life in prison yet. But unless something unexpected happens in the months ahead, that's the road he's facing. And this case isn't just about him. It's about how America responds to violence tied to politics, speech, and division. If you want more deep dive breakdowns into cases shaking headlines, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and stay tuned. The story doesn't end here, and neither do we.